stop us from getting certain nutritional supplements. And so they're curious about this and what the linguistics say about codecs. And could that not also be a tipping point for what you're calling kind of a revolution if you take away people's ability to get something? And there's millions, I guess, I think the latest is about 150 million people use some kind of alternative medicine in this country.
Right, and I don't know that people are going to be motivated to be in an active revolutionary state due to just having their, vitamin E supplement removed. Mm-hmm. However, it will be part and parcel of the entire suppression effort, and so thus at that level, any bit of extra oppression leads to inevitably that response. As Che Guevara had, in his plans for how to get a country to fall into revolution, one thing he would always do would be to go after the powers that be in such a way that they would respond on the populace. Because the more you irritate the populace until eventually it gets to the point where they just can't take it anymore. So it's the sum total of everything. The Codex Alimentus and all of that business is probably going to be a secondary issue to the dollar death and the international problems we have. It will fade into a lesser category over 2010, but nonetheless, it's going to make a lot of people very irritated. They're not going to be in as well or healthy as they normally would because they won't be able to get this material. But a lot of it indeed may be the result of the dollar dying, and the official move to have such things suppressed may be secondary or moot.
Now, I want to ask you about the dollar dying. Our man contends, from his viewpoint, that they're all in this together and that they do control the dollar, and predicting a one-world currency is like predicting the past. And using his words, it is, we've already have one, it's the dollar. And,
right. And I've never seen the point of one world currency anyway, because they always use the Hegelian dialectic of divide and conquer.
Yeah. And Andrew argues that, hell, they've been working on this dollar since 1913. Why would they quit now? So, I mean, that's an interesting argument. But I guess
his viewpoint, though, is colored by being in the academic view or in the economic world. Because see, if you step back and you look at it at a macro level,
mm-hmm.
No currency other than the U.S. dollar, no paper currency on this planet has ever existed longer than 72 years. There just isn't one. They have a natural lifespan. Paper currencies die. They always have, from the point of China introducing them through any currency experiment you care to name. There have been 4 currency crashes that have swept our country alone. We don't use the greenback dollar. That is mm-hmm. a name really that refers to the dollar of the 1800s. Mm-hmm. There was a Confederate currency. There was the Continentals. We've had the private bank currencies, and we've had currency crashes globally. Argentina, France, just name a country, and you can say, okay, and this year the currency crashed. 80 years before that, their previous paper currency crashed. Usually there's a period of time between these in which we go back to precious metals. Mm-hmm. So his viewpoint that it won't happen because they're good at it, it fails to take into account the fact that since 1913, the debt level on the dollar has now got to the point where there's less than 1 cent worth of room in the dollar to maneuver, and they will soon crush that and won't go into hyperinflation. At that point, arguably, the dollar is dead, and no one's going to be accepting it as a petrodollar anymore or as a global reserve currency. And I've heard the argument that, well, it can't be done away with because 64% of the planet stores all their wealth in dollars. And it's like saying that, well, we can't have a stock market crash because everybody is storing their wealth in stock. I'm sorry, that argument is spurious. It's
mm-hmm.
invalid.
So, oftentimes economists or people that deal with the numbers and what they know over the last 30, 40 years, they're taking the view, if I hear you right, Clif, that it can't happen because it's never happened, or they're not looking at
the big picture, right?
Big picture, which involves a lot more than what they're looking at.
Sure, and you start talking to economists, and they say, well, the dollar can't crash. They're very good at it. And you say, well, what about John Law? What about the introduction of paper currency there? What about Chung Wing Sat, who introduced paper currency in China and was very successful, and it lasted 68 years. The only reason that the dollar has lasted so long is, the reason the dollar has lasted so long is twofold, and that is that it was a global reserve, and that global reserve status was enforced by our military. Countries were afraid to dump the dollar. You notice they no longer are. Plus, there's another issue here, and that is at a higher level, the dollar is the underpinning of the Anglo-American empire, what we call the Anglo-sphere. It is crashing the same way that the Roman currency crashed when the Roman Empire had been superseded by its provinces and had lost its technological edge. So at a very large macro level, the Anglosphere or the Anglo-American Empire is dying. It is dying because we're being superseded and overcome by the technological impetus of what used to be our provinces. And that will occur no matter what. And as a result of that, they don't need our dollar as much anymore. Therefore, it's also dying as a result of that. And so all these factors have a tendency to join and compound. I would agree, for instance, that if we were 50 years into the dollar and the American empire was crumbling because of a military defeat, that no, the dollar would not die. But we're at 80 plus years into a 72-year lifespan, and we've been on life support these past few years, and that life support is going to be very rapidly withdrawn over the course of a year. So at this point, I would stand on my prediction and suggest that your economic person is blinded by his own knowledge of economics.
Okay. 888-663-6386. Let's go to another call. What's your first name? Where are you calling from? Hello?
Hello?
Go ahead. You're on the air.
Yes, I had another question for Mr. High. In lots of ancient drawings of quote-unquote space aliens, you see them wearing a helmet. And from reading your stuff and other things, I'm pretty sure there's going to be a lot of magnetic fluctuations, which would possibly essentially wipe people's memories. So rather than them being space aliens, quote-unquote, they might simply be people who had a tinfoil-lined hockey helmet.
Ooh, never thought of that. That's good insight. And I know that the Dogon people of Africa, when they draw pictures of the fish humanoids that brought them knowledge and knowledge that can't be disputed, about Sirius B, etc., they always draw those guys in spacesuits, basically, for the fish kind of things with helmets on them. It's an interesting thought. Maybe it is indeed related to magnetics.
Here's an email that I don't quite understand, and it's kind of written a little cryptically, but if I can get the crux of it here, Clif High, is that they heard you on the air with George Ure, and they were talking about something with the moon changing, and Clif downplayed George's great enthusiasm about this. You know what I'm speaking of?
No, I'm always on George's case because his monkey mind gets all whipped up all the time.
Let me see. Our alien friends will be actually going to move or remove the moon. And George was saying something about that. And so here's what the guy said. He said, now, squeeze out what's really going on with Clif. I don't want him holding anything back on us. Do you know what he's talking about?
No, I'm
about
sorry,
the moon? Nah.
I'm sorry, I don't. I've talked with George about this stuff. We don't have anything about the moon.
You don't?
Being shifted, no, relative to people trucking it about. We do talk about frequently the moon being such an anomalous thing, and that to a certain extent it's quite true that it should not exist. It's the only body in space that we're aware of that doesn't spin.
Is there something in the linguistics and what your work is showing, something to this whole magnetic, the other caller alluded to, the magnetic shift? Is this a real thing?
Oh, yeah, it's actually ongoing now. All of the planets in our solar system are reacting to something, okay? Mm-hmm. And you'll hear it described variously as, energies from space or a particular energetic part of space. Our linguistics in 1997 started picking up what we called sun disease. That archetype has gradually moved over to what we're calling the big squeeze. And it's our understanding from the linguistics and from the reality backing up the linguistics that what's happening is that the magnetic a region of intense magnetism, larger than we're used to dealing with, exists at the ecliptic edge of the Milky Way, and we're passing through that. Our solar system takes 20 years to pass through it. We'll peak and be at the middle of that point in the year 2012. Now, the issue for us is twofold. Our solar system could be captured this time by the Milky Way. We're not truly part of the Milky Way galaxy. We're actually from Sagittarius B. And it's been in the process of being eaten up for like 600 million years by the Milky Way galaxy. We may become part of the Milky Way galaxy in 2012. If it does, all bets are off because we have no experience whatsoever to predict from that point on. If we don't, what will happen is we'll pass the point of intense magnetism in 2012, and then we'll go through a period of about 9 to 10 years of very intense Earth changes, as well as all planets in the solar system, as they sort of shake off or slough off this extra magnetic influence that's been pushing down on them all this time.
We haven't talked much about that. How close has your forecasting been for 2009 and Earth changes that you all talked about last year?
We've been fairly accurate about a lot of that, and in fact, at the moment, we've got some language for some fairly nasty earthquakes on the west coast of the Americas, both north and south, at damage levels starting in on 2010. Our issue at this point, though, is that I don't want to say this, the level of earth changes that are going to affect all of us in 2010 will not be to such a strength that the populace of the U.S. will be overly concerned by them. Yeah, it's going to be horrific. We're going to have big earthquakes, giant tornadoes, huge hurricanes, that kind of problem, and droughts and fires. But in the main, it's going to be our social degradation that's got everybody occupied in 2010. But 2011, when the alien war stuff shows up, then we've got a very disturbing amount of data suggesting that a good portion of our time will be spent attempting to cope on a daily basis with the changes and challenges that the climate and the planet are throwing at us. So it may get to the point where in 2011, assuming that you commuted to work, that maybe every day you'd get up and just wonder if you were going to be able to make it through that day's rain or whatever to get to work. In other words, it'll impact you on a daily basis.
Do you think being on high ground, a couple thousand feet above sea level, is going to be important?
I don't know. That's the issue. It all has to do with personal karma. Okay.
Sure.
Everybody's karma is their own. When the day you're going to die is the day you're going to die, regardless. Now, our issue here is that getting to altitude makes some sense under certain conditions, but there's no guarantee, for instance, that any high altitude spot is going to remain high altitude. That we may indeed, if we go through this magnetism in a very severe way, we may get to the point where whole continents subside, in which case it doesn't matter if you're...
I hate it when that happens, man.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, it just ruins your day. But the real issue for us is that the following. There's this thing out there called the Narmer plate. Narmer is Narma is the name of the place that we call Egypt today, and that's what the people used to call it. And way back when, they made this plate of material, and they inscribed 11 passages, such as we're going through now, and described what occurred on each of the previous 11 ones, and some were worse than others. The last one was not quite so bad. It was a catastrophe, there's no question, but it wasn't as bad as the previous two. And so there seems to be some suggestion that we're sort of winding down on the catastrophic response to going through these periods of magnetism. So maybe it won't be so bad as to induce a pole shift, wipe out all of most of humanity, and start us all over again, as has been these previous 11 times. Yeah, I mean, we're a species with amnesia, and we start over again and get up to this level and get knocked down and start over again, etc.
What's your first name? Where are you calling from?
Hi, I'm Greg. I'm calling from Apollo Beach, Florida.
You're on the air.
Hi, Clif and Patrick. Clif, in the past you mentioned hyperchroniac humans who
Hyperchroniac humans?
Yeah, who will live in time differently than the main populace of the planet. Are you seeing any new linguistics on the hyperchroniac human?
Yes, we're actually seeing that it's growing. The first indications that we had in our previous reports were, say, pointing to maybe 1% of 1% of a general populace having some experience of that. Now we're seeing that it's up into where it's maybe 2 or 3 or 4% of 1% of the general populace, and we're starting to get some level of definition. So indeed, there are people that are writing about their experiences in going through this. And then, unfortunately, we're also getting indications of a lot of people